Now that we've seen budget constraints and the limitations on people's purchases that it brings, let's try to see how people make their decisions. And to understand this, we need to understand indifference curves, which give us an idea of people's preference. An indifference curve shows all combinations of certain goods that yield the same level of utility or satisfaction. This indifference curve may be quite different for someone as myself as compared to someone else. However, these indifference curves have certain properties that are the same for everyone. So I'm just going to go through these 4 properties of indifference curves. Indifference curves, first off, we say that indifference curves, the more we have, the better things are. So let's say here I have, again, cola, and here I have pizza. So it's not C and P, cola and pizza. And I'll have this situation where if I have multiple indifference curves, we'll see where they're downward sloping in a second. My direction of preference would be over here. And the easy way to see it is if I compare this point to this point to this point to this point, while here point A compared to point B has more cola and more pizza than in the other case. More pizza, more cola. So therefore, I must be happier at A than B. And B than C, I have more of both as well, and C than D. Therefore, my direction of preference is this way. The more I could have of 2 goods that I enjoy, the happier I will be. And notice that these indifference curves, I didn't make one that's upward sloping like this that would link all of these points together, because it would be false to think that for me to have 100 milliliters of Coca-Cola and a quarter slice of pizza will yield the same happiness level as if I had a full cola and a full slice of pizza when I'm hungry, or 2 of each, or so on and so forth. Therefore, I have to be dealing with different indifference curves. So if this was my indifference curve 1, indifference curve 2, indifference curve 3, indifference curve 4, well, each of these have a certain level of utility or a certain happiness level associated to it. So here I might be a little upset. Here I might be indifferent. Here I might be a little happy. And anything along this curve here might make me very happy. Okay. Second one that we're going to look at is indifference curves are downward sloping. And I was kind of highlighting this here now. And simply, we have to make sure that indifference curves, once again with cola and pizza, are downward sloping. If I were to make an indifference curve upward sloping, let's say I make it a little bit upward sloping, this is contradictory because if I compare point A to point B, well, for point A compared to point B, I have more cola and I also have more pizza. This is impossible. Okay, so all indifference curves must be downward sloping. Okay, so this upward sloping case is not possible. They have to be drawn as such. Indifference curves do not cross each other, assuming constant preferences. How could we prove this? Well, let's just draw out a situation, and by showing how it's impossible, it's a proof. So let's say I have this indifference curve 1, indifference curve 2. Now on these curves, I will add 2 points on each of the curves. So here, let's say I have my point A, here my point B, and over here my point C. Indifference curves would tell you that any point along this indifference curve, whether I'm here, 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 or here, will all lead the same level of satisfaction, the same level of happiness. Therefore, I must be indifferent between obtaining point A or point B. It must not bother me at all. So here I know that I should be indifferent between point A and point B if these are properly drawn. Then afterwards, in this segment here, we have to say, well, since we're dealing with 2 points along the same indifference curve again, we're dealing with a situation where they both lead to the same level of happiness between point B and point C and all other points because it's along this same indifference curve. However, if you're indifferent between point A and point B and point B and point C, you should be indifferent between point A and C, but that is not the case. If I compare point A that has a certain amount of cola and pizza and point C that has more cola and more pizza, I am not indifferent between the 2 points. Therefore, this is not possible. Okay, possible. The last example, or the last property, is indifference curves bow inwards towards the origin. So what does this mean is that indifference curves typically have this kind of shape that goes towards the origin. It's not bowing outwards, it's not completely straight, has this kind of shape as such. Okay, so this is one indifference curve. Here I flip pizza and cola, it doesn't really matter. This is just one of the indifference curves. And simply, it's going to be bowed towards the origin. So here, if I had, like the other examples, I had cola and pizza. The indifference curve may look slightly different, but either way, regardless of whether you put pizza or cola, it should have this shape. And we'll explain why through the next example. First off, I just want to highlight a few mistakes here when drawing out these curves. So in a second, we're going to combine indifference curves with budget constraints. And let's say I were to do it right now. So here I have cola and pizza. This was my budget constraint. Okay. And let's say I want to add indifference curves here. Okay. This is how I would properly do it. But the big mistake is people often have indifference curves looking like this. The big mistake here is that indifference curves cannot have this upward portion or this upward portion here. Because saying that this point here or this point here I'm indifferent is not true. So make sure, beware that when you draw out indifference curves, you do not include these upward segments. Only like the first one I've drawn that has, even though it bows toward the origin, it still has a downward sloping component all the way through. And now, moving on to an example to try to understand these indifference curves, I'm just going to go through 2 classes of goods that we may encounter. The first class of goods I'm going to look at is comparing gasoline from Esso to Petro-Canada. And here I'm going to be looking at comparing left shoes with right shoes. So here, when I look at Esso from Petro-Canada or gasoline from Esso or from Petro-Canada, what can I say? If I tell you here you could have 0 liters of Petro-Canada and 50 liters from Esso, and they're both next to each other, and you both treat this gasoline as equivalent. They both come from the same refinery. If this is one point that leads to a certain level of happiness for you, let's say you win a prize that gives you this amount of free petrol, free gasoline per week for the rest of your life. Well, if you get 50 liters at Esso and they're both side by side, what could be an example that would make you equally happy? If you think, well, getting 50 liters from Petro-Canada also makes you equally happy, well, you're right. because they're completely equivalent. It takes you the same amount of time getting it from one or the other. So you're definitely happier, just as happy getting 50 liters from one or the other. If you think it's very easy, okay, so this would be kind of a situation that's not completely realistic, but close to realism, that's really easy to get a combination of the two without taking more time. Well, you could think that getting 25 liters from both places, if it's getting pumped into your car while you're at work or while you're playing with friends, you don't really care if it's a combination of the two. If it's the equivalent petrol, it's going to lead to the same satisfaction level. Same thing as 49 liters from one from the other, and so on and so forth. So all of these would lead to the same satisfaction. So here we would have a straight line indifference curve. And what's special, what kind of category of goods would this have to be? It's a category of goods that we would coin as perfect substitutes. If they weren't perfect substitutes, if you see a difference between the two, or there's something, not necessarily that one's better than the other, but you kind of like to consume both goods in combination. It could be gasoline and diesel fuel or something else that you don't necessarily consume and they're not perfectly substitutes, might be a little bit different. But with perfect substitutes, this would typically be the case. What would it look like? What would an inference curve look like for left shoes and right shoes? So I'm going to start with 1 point here, saying you have one left shoe and one right shoe in here. Just to be clear, we're dealing with people that have two legs. It's not a situation that you are a one-legged individual. You have two legs. Therefore, you need a left shoe and a right shoe. So if I say you have a left shoe and a right shoe, one of each, what would be another point which would lead the same level of satisfaction for you? Would getting two left shoes and no right shoes, like over here, lead the same satisfaction level? Probably not, because what are you going to do with two left shoes and barefooted with your right foot? Not much, okay? So in this situation here, instead, we could think that if I have one right shoe, if I have at least one left shoe, I'm going to get the same satisfaction level, regardless if I have two left shoes, three left shoes, four left shoes. Basically because I'm not going to have my right shoe that's going to become dirtier and more worn and torn, and just keep on swapping my left shoe. It's going to look quite weird. Having one shoe better than the other might be uncomfortable because one's going to be more worn, so it's going to be a little lower to the ground compared to the other one. So you could think that having one right shoe, when two left or three or four, the extra one you're just going to probably just throw it out. So it doesn't really offer you much happiness or utility. So in this situation here, we could think you're equally as happy as having just a single pair. Same thing if I have one left shoe, having more right shoes lead to the same happiness level. But can I go this way? No, not exactly. If I were to go down to one left shoe and zero right shoes, well, then I'm definitely down a satisfaction level. So this would be one indifference curve. And then maybe having two pairs would be the next indifference curve, and so on and so forth. Whereas here we would have one indifference curve with a total of 50 liters of petrol per week, one another indifference curve with a total of 51 liters, and then 52, and so on and so forth. And they'd all be parallel, they won't be crossing, and the further right you go, as we said with the axioms, the happier you will be. So here, what's special about this type of good, this indifference curve, it deals with perfect complements. So if you're dealing with perfect complements, you're going to have an indifference curve that looks like this. If you're dealing with perfect substitutes, you're going to have an indifference curve that looks like this. So if you think that your good is in between a perfect substitute and a perfect complement, So it could be apples and oranges, or even apples and yogurt or something else. Well, in those situations, it's not going to be a perfect complement, so it's not going to be the situation here. If you have more oranges or more yogurt, you're going to be happier, so this wouldn't work. And it's probably not going to be the situation that you're just as happy having 50 oranges per month than 50 liters of yogurt, or a combination of the two of 25-25. It's probably going to have that downward sloping portion, such as this, something like this, meaning that I'm happier having 20 oranges and 20 liters of yogurt. That's a large amount, but like 20 units of yogurt, 20 small yogurts per month, than I am of having 50 of one or the other. Why does it have this situation and not this straight line? Well, I typically like to have a variety of products. If you want me to just consume one or the other, you'll have to compensate me more. I would prefer having 25-25, obviously, than 20-20, but 20-20 leads the same satisfaction level as 50 and 0, or this 0 here and 50 here, because here at least I have a combination of the two products. Okay, so I'll go back to beers and wings or anything else. If you have food and you have liquids, you're probably going to prefer a combination. So it's not true that we'll have this straight line indifference curve. So this is the main reason why it bows towards the origin. And you can see this one's like completely going towards the origin with straight lines. This one is just in between. So if a good is closer to being a perfect substitute, it'd be a very small bow towards the origin. And if the goods are very close to being perfect complements, just maybe hot dogs and hot dog buns or something else, it might have a much bigger bow towards the origin. Yeah. So now that we've understood how preferences are built, how we have to respect certain axioms, and depending on the goods that we're dealing with and the individuals that we're dealing with, we have different preferences. We're going to try to match that up together and look at how to determine the optimal consumption of an individual.